Hi everyone, I'm very excited to see you all here today. I'm Nati, and today we are going to cover the top 5 mistakes when writing a PRD. I will devote the first 5 minutes to talk about me and my business, just to give you some background, and then we'll start with the topic of this webinar. So, I summarized my professional career into 5 bullets to make it short. Originally, I'm a software engineer by profession. I spent half of my career in engineering, writing code, managing teams, developing algorithms. At some point, I co-founded a startup called News Fusion in digital media, and I sold it. And then I switched to product management, which is the second half of my career. I started as senior product. I switched to become a director of product of 2 product groups. Then I became a head of product, and later a VP of product, and also managing the data science team, and later the engineering for my business unit. Now, during the last 3 or 4 years, I've been mentoring dozens of product managers and entrepreneurs, and I found out that I both like it, and I believe I'm good at it, which made me make a decision to make it my real thing, my next real thing, which I call effective product management, which is practically a training platform for product managers. It includes several services. I offer first a very big knowledge base on my site. Over the years, I've written a lot of posts covering everything from hands-on stuff like how to do quarterly planning, to how to interview customers, and up to more sophisticated stuff for product leaders, such as product strategy, defensibility, product market fit, and stuff like that. You can find it all on the site. In the link I provided, you have a very clever navigation there where you can find pretty much whatever you want. And if something is still missing, please write me and I'll cover it in my next post. Okay? Other than that, I provide a suite of services for companies and individuals. For companies, I offer one-to-one mentoring of product people. I offer training of junior product managers or product managers who just started their careers. I teach them the profession. And also for product leaders, I consult on product strategy and stuff like that. And for individuals, I usually save my pro bonus time, where I try to meet and mentor people who are just starting their career or maybe even advancing their career but would like to get some advice. I prefer to keep it as pro bono as much as I can. I can't guarantee that I will be able to keep it forever and depending on the demand, but some of you even in this meeting already met with me at least once. So I'm very approachable. You can reach out to me on email or connect with me on LinkedIn and drop me a message, or on Discord, send me a direct message. Worst case, I will tell you that I don't have time and we will try some other time. Next, and this is the most strategic for me, I'm developing courses and webinars like this one. I currently offer only one course on my site. It's about how to write a PRD. And it's a 5-session course, live course, but I plan to offer many more courses in the coming period and also much more webinars. If you have ideas for webinars or courses that you would like me to come up with, just let me know. And there is a community. I just started my business in January, so the community is relatively small, but again, this is strategic for me. I want to build a community where product managers can meet each other, chat, exchange ideas. I found out that Facebook's kind of limited, and any other places that I looked for, I wasn't happy with the community that I can build there. So eventually I landed on Discord. So I have my own server on Discord where you can join to the community there. For people who are taking the courses, this is the place you can talk about the homework and exchange ideas. Also, all the announcements I do is there. The post I posted there as well. And the most important part, twice per week, I host their Ask Me Anything sessions. Means that you don't need to schedule with me. You just need to come to the hours that I pasted it on the chat. Just come here with one click. You can connect to a voice channel with me and ask me whatever you want about product management. So it's very easy. You can also go to the events tab on the Discord server and click and I'm interested on the Ask Me Anything session. And if you have the Discord app installed on your phone or a desktop client, it will let you know, it will send you a notification when I start. Or alternatively, you can simply put it on your calendar and maybe it's easier for you, I don't know. Those who have been mentored by me or worked with me know that I'm taking a very pragmatic and effective approach to product management. This is why I call my business Effective Product Management. I'm not talking high level, not in my post and not when I mentor. It's very down to earth. I assume that reality is ugly, chaotic, and messy, and I will explain to you how to navigate this reality. If you work with me, all my posts are tuned like this. For example, again, if you want to know how to do a quarterly plan when everyone is asking you to fulfill the request, I have a post about it. It's a playbook, step by step, how you do it with the least amount of effort with maximum value to all. This is my approach I'm taking to everything I'm doing regarding product management. With that in mind, we can jump into the main topic, the 5 mistakes I see that product managers are doing when writing PRDs. Now, a PRD is a product requirements document, but I prefer to call it simply a spec. And this is the term I'm going to use in this webinar. I don't know why PRD sounds too stiff to me. I prefer spec, sounds less formal. So before we proceed, let's agree on some definitions that I'm going to use throughout this webinar. When I'm saying the what, I'm talking about what needs to be built, the building blocks, the functional requirements, stuff like that. When I mention the why, I'm talking about why it needs to be built, the motivation, the pains, the potential impact, any signals that you have about why the feature needs to be built. When I'm talking about the when, I'm talking about when it needs to be built, the priorities, the project order, timelines, stuff like that. And then when I mention the how, I'm talking about how it needs to be built, the design, the implementation details, and so forth. Usually that belongs to the engineering department. Now, a spec is a working document that defines the product or feature to be built and why it needs to be built. It means it covers the why, it covers the what, and in different words, what we are trying to build and why it's important. Now, there are many stakeholders who are vested in the spec that you are working on and will be part of what we are doing. The first group is what I call the builders. The builders are any stakeholder who needs to produce something based on your spec. So the first group is, of course, the developers. They will take your spec and they need to build something based on that. Okay? So those are the developers. We also have the UX and UI designers. They take your spec and they create screens, wireframes, flows, controls, stuff like that. We have the analysts who are taking a spec and may produce dashboard based on this feature or answer ad hoc queries about it if you want to get some question about the performance of your feature, stuff like that. And we have the QA who writes test plans for your feature. Okay, those are the main builders. But there are other stakeholders who are involved with the spec. Could be the management, someone from your management, could be the CEO, one of the C-levels, could be your boss. Sometimes they have a feature they want you to work on, so they will talk to you about it and ask you to do it. In that case, they will be very interested in what you are writing in your spec. For bigger companies, you have the product marketing. Those are the guys who are taking your spec, your feature, and creating marketing materials according to it. So in some sense, they can be considered part of the builders as well, but they don't exist in every company. Okay. And you have the business teams, customer success, support, and sales. Sometimes they have requests for features, and in that case, they will be very interested in what you're working on. And aside from the internal stakeholders, we have the external stakeholders, your customers and your users, who may be very interested in what you're doing as well. So you're not alone when you're writing your spec, and this is important to understand it. Now, with that in mind, we can start talking about the mistakes, and I'm going to do it in an ascending order. It means that I'm going to start with the least severe mistake, and I'm going to climb up to the top, up to the most severe mistake. Okay, so let's start. Mistake number 1, or mistake number 5, sorry. The least severe one, including irrelevant sections. Now, I'm not sure when was the last time you Googled or searched for spec templates or PRD templates, but there are dozens of PRD templates on the web. And for some reason, most of them tend to include many useless sections. And the other ones tend to include sections that should belong in different documents. I'm not sure why they are doing this, probably to make sure they cover all fronts and you can't complain about them that they miss something, but this is not helpful. Now, your company probably also has some sort of template, so you need to check, because each company has their own template, if what I'm going to say apply to your company template as well. Now, I claim that you need to keep your spec as short as possible. Why? Because the longer it is less likely that it's going to be read. It's more likely that the readers won't find what they need. And from my experience working with product manager, if your spec is quite long, it's more likely that you are working too hard for no additional value. Okay, it means that you are filling sections that bring no additional value to your readers. Hence, we would like to keep it as short as possible while keeping the goal in mind. And what's the goal really? The main goal. Our main goal is to make sure that the builders know what they need to build. Yes, there are secondary goals as well. For example, explaining the why we are doing this, why it's important, what is the pain, providing background, also asking analytical questions, setting KPIs. Yes, we have other goals for the spec, but the main goal is for the builders. Because you need to understand, at the end of the day, you'll do a spec review. Everyone will go over, you'll do some guidance over the spec. People will see whatever you've written there, you provide the background. And after the spec review is ended, most of the time, the only section that will be revisited over and over again is the functional requirements. The other sections, probably no one is ever going to read them again aside from you. Okay? So, how do we achieve it? By sticking to the plan, meaning making sure that the spec covers the what and the why, and only that, and we are getting rid of anything else. Let's take example of a useless section or section that belongs somewhere else. And the easiest section to get rid of are project management sections. Okay? Examples, sections such as status, whether the feature was already released or not. Okay, if it's not scheduled, when it's going to be scheduled, the timing, when you plan to ship your product or your feature, milestones, follow-up tasks, stuff like that, resources and budget. I have no idea why it's there. Okay, my take on this is completely useless, because first, it clutters the document. Second, it never met in reality, right? If you write on the spec that this feature is going to be released on February 14, there is no way in the world it's going to happen. Okay, and probably if you allocated resources and budget, you're going to exceed them. So why bother? And nobody actually coming back to the spec and updates it when it doesn't matter. Okay, you wrote February 14, it was released in June. Nobody's going back to the spec and update it is June. Okay, so why do it in the first place? Really, just clutter the document. It has nothing to do with the why and the what. If you want to manage this feature as a project, use a Monday board, use a Jira board, use whatever project planning software you are using, but don't put it into the spec. Other sections which are more questionable are product management sections. Sections such as assumptions, product positioning, personas, and vision. Now, at first glance, you may ask me, Nati, what do you want? Those are highly related to the spec. I say related, could be, should be in the spec, no. Why? In my course of how to write PRD, I teach the several parts of the spec, and the first part is an overview section. This is where you put the background of why we are doing this, mainly the why. Some give some data signals that you see, some other requests. You give the whole background in 3 or 4 paragraphs, not longer than that, because again, nobody's going to read it more than once. The only section that's going to be revisited are the functional requirements. Okay, so there is no point for you to show off. You did your discovery process, great. Write your findings in a document, learn them, understand them. But in the spec, we don't want to create an information overload for the readers. So you select the top signals, the top data points, the top pains that led you to write the spec and put it there. The rest doesn't need to be there. Product positioning is even marketing. No need to put it there, okay? And personas. Personas are very important. You are working in a specific business which serve a specific type of customers in a specific domain. The customers and the personas usually never change in the lifetime of a company. If you want to do a serious work about it, do a persona analysis. There is a thing in product management. Create a document about that. Describe all your personas. And there's no need to repeat all these personas for each and every spec that you do. Okay? There is a link to them in the user stories. If you are familiar with user story start by describing the persona who is going to benefit from this story. You just need to provide the name of the persona. There's no need to describe the whole personas over and over in each and every spec because this doesn't change. Now, vision, with all the respect to vision, most features don't have vision. Okay? Only very big features or great new product. And in that case, sure, you can use this section, but don't do it automatically because it doesn't make any sense. So my take on this, those are mostly useless because they clutter the document. They are repetitive. They don't add anything, any new value to yourself or the builders. Okay? So you need to use them at their own discretion. Now, I just gave you some examples here. If you, again, search for templates on the web, you'll find dozens of templates with a lot of useless sections there. Nothing that you need to actually do. You are not getting points for adding additional sections, on the contrary. So what you need to keep in mind to stick to the why and the what and get everything else out. Okay. So this is mistake number 1. Okay. And next. Mistake number 4. Not setting or wrongly setting KPIs. First question is, why do we need to set KPIs to our features? And the answer is, we want to make sure that the feature delivered on its expectations. And for that, we need to know how to measure the feature success. Now, what is the meaning of successful features? It means that the feature is discovered easy enough, which is discoverability. It means that the feature is utilized often enough, which is activation. And it means that the feature delivers its projected impact. Okay? Now, number 1 and number 2 only applies for features which are customer or user facing. That is, if you don't have a user interface, those do not apply in this case for this feature. Many features are backend features that don't have any user interface. Okay, which leave number 3, which always apply, and I think it's the most important one because it encompasses 1 and 2 within. Okay. Now, common mistakes that I see when setting KPIs, let's talk about it for a second. The first mistake is not setting KPIs at all or any measurement for success. The second mistake is defining it the wrong way. Let's take some examples. Here's an example that I see. Goal, increased engagement. Wow, okay, what is an engagement? This is not even measurable metric. Okay, it could be interpreted in so many ways, so this is bad. Okay, a bit of improvement, affected KPI, traffic to site. Okay, cool, so this is measurable, we know the KPI, but is it going up, is it going down? What are we expecting to see? What is the expected impact that we expect to see it? We don't know. A bit better, expected result, increase in CTR. Okay, CTR is very measurable, very known, but by how much and within what time frame? Okay. I'll talk in a second on how to fix those, but let's finish with the mistakes. The third type of mistake is defining the wrong KPI, meaning you are putting a KPI which doesn't correlate with the feature you are working on. For example, could be that you are working on an engagement feature and for some reason you expect increase in sales. Or you are working on a security feature and for some reason you expect to see an increase in actives. I see this also happening a lot. So what are the requirements for the KPIs really, if you want to fix that? It must be a measurable metric. It must have a measurable goal, okay? If you say that the CTR is going to increase, say the number, it would be 30% uplift, for example. And you need to mention the time frame for this to happen. Because when you clicked on the button, the feature is going to production, not going to happen overnight. Then you see 30% uplift for the CTR, right? It could be for if you fix some kind of issue with the network traffic, so immediately you see bumpy traffic, but for most features, the impact is not realized when it goes to production. So how much time it's going to take? 1 day, 1 week, 1 month? I don't know. You tell me. Okay? So the approach should be, first, choose the top 2-3 business KPIs that will be affected with the release of this feature. Second, estimate the minimum impact on each of these KPIs. And third, project how much time it will take until the impact is realized. The KPI, the impact, and the time to impact must all be easily measured. Okay? Now let's take some examples of good KPIs definitions. 3 months after the feature release, the deliverability rates of total campaigns increased by 20%, and we define deliverability, email fully received by the recipient. Cool. So we got the 3 components here, the time frame, the KPI, and the expected impact. Another example, time spent on section X increased by 10% following 1 month of the release. Okay, very, very clear. And here is an example of an activation KPI. 25% of the dashboard users have tried the feature during the months following the release. Okay, cool. Now, usually at this point, I get a question, the following question. Okay, how do I know the minimum expected impact? I'm always being asked this question. So how we address it? And the answer is simple. You need to answer the following question. What would be the minimal amount of impact that below it, the feature is not worth doing? Okay, let's take example. Let's say that you are working on a feature that should increase the CTR. Let's say that I come to you and I tell you, look, I have a crystal ball in my hand, and I tell you that this feature is going to increase the CTR by 0.1%. does it worth to you to do this feature? Now, you need to consider everyone's work around you. Your work on the spec, the builders work on their production, QA everything, take it to production just for 0.1% impact. The answer, unless you are TikTok, which 0.1 means a lot, probably not. It is not satisfying for you. You want bigger impact. Okay, so in that case, I will ask you back, what's the minimum impact you would like to see in order to make it worthwhile to do this feature? Is it 1%? Is it 5%? Is it 10%? Come up with a number, okay? And tell me what it is. Now, sometimes at this point, this is a reality check for you, and you say, wow, okay, I don't see this making a true impact. Okay, so why work on it? Why are we doing this? Scrap everything and work on the next feature, okay? Or you can say, okay, the minimal impact I expect to see is 5%. Below this, doesn't worth every one time, and I believe it's achievable, okay? Fine. So this is how we estimate the impact. And the question about how to properly set KPIs. Okay. We are climbing up the ladder. We are now at mistake number 3. And for that, I asked ChatGPT to produce an image that shows the mistake. Let me know if you can guess it. Any guesses what the mistake is? Okay. The mistake is forgetting analytical or BI events. Okay. Let's talk about it for a second. If we want to make data-driven decisions, what we need for that? We need data, right? Okay. And what produces data? In order so we can start gathering data, what needs to happen? We need to have analytical or BI events to be fired. What do I mean by that? I mean that someone is clicking on a button. We need to log that. A process wake up in the background and is doing something meaningful. We need to log that. Okay? Someone visited the site. A user did some kind of operation. We need to log all these events into the database if we want to be able to ask questions about it later. So what needs to happen in order for the events to be implemented and triggered? You need to ask for it in the spec, okay? If you believe that what I just said is trivial, and of course the developers will do it, of course they will log all these events, of course they will do everything, then I will tell you back that you are delusional. It's not going to happen. Okay? What's going to happen is you are going to take the feature to production, and then you'll try to check the performance of the feature, and the analyst, if you have an analyst or you're doing it yourself, I'm not sure, but when you try to get some performance metrics or whatever to know about your feature, you'll find out that nothing is recorded, nothing is logged, and the data is not there. And then you'll go back, starting all the cycles of defining these events, adding them to the developers, and then triggering them, and then you can start collecting the data. For some reason, there are millions of spec templates on the web, and I yet to find a single one who had this section with it. I don't know why. Anyway, the right process, if you want to be able to ask questions about the performance of your feature, you need first to ask the question, the analytical question you would like to get answer for after the feature is released. Then the engineering team will take your questions, which are defined in the spec, design around them the events and when they need to be triggered in order to be able to answer your questions. Then they will implement these events and trigger them in the right places. And then you can go to your data analyst and ask them to build you a dashboard or to ask a question about the performance of the feature. Okay? Otherwise, it won't happen. Let's take some examples of how you do it. For a feature that enables the publishers to categorize the story they post. Okay? Here's an example of an analytical question that you might want to ask. What are the most common categories our customers use to classify their articles? Okay, legit question, but if we don't log that, you won't have answers for that. For a feature that enables users to add polls to comments on Instagram. Okay, this is a feature that was released not long ago by Instagram, allowing users to add polls when they comment on posts on Instagram. Okay, so let's say you are the product manager responsible for that, you release the feature, you want to know what percentage of commenters have used this feature in a given time frame. A legit question, right? Another question, for a feature that introduces a self-onboarding wizard with a few steps, you want to know how the funnel of the self-onboarding wizard looks like from the first exposure to completion. You want to see the funnel, right? For that, you need to log each and every step, how many users reach in every step, what are the parameters and stuff like that. So you can do a funnel analysis. Okay, so those are legit questions that you need to stop for a second and ask yourself what I would like to know about this feature after it is released. You need to write it down. Okay, let's see the procedure. You need to add the section dedicated for analytical questions. You need to add 3 to 6 analytical questions. Anything you may wish to ask about the performance of this feature, or anything new we can learn about the product or users because we released this feature to the world. You also need to make sure that the KPIs that you set, we can know the impact on them based on those questions as well. Any question on those analytical questions? We are climbing up the ladder. Mistake number 2. Here again, we have I asked ChatGPT to produce an image, but it was very hard to describe the problem. So I'm pretty sure it would be nearly impossible to guess the problem for the image, but let's try. Okay. So, do you have any idea what mistake I'm going to talk about? No. Okay. And the mistake is delving into the how. What do I mean by that? Now, the spec needs to cover only the why and the what. We already talked about it. The how is the responsibility of the engineering team, not you. Hence, you should never delve into the how in your specs, meaning you should not provide any implementation details. And I see it too often happening. Let's take a bad example of a functional requirement. The configuration of the feature should reside within a JSON file called betconfig.json with the field XY, which can take the value light or heavy, and ZW, which can take the values 1 to 5. The XY field determines the toughness of the security to apply, and ZW determines how many times per day we should run the security check. Wow. Okay? Those are based on real-life things that I've seen, and I'm seeing a lot. This is very bad. Okay? First, we dictated a JSON file. We shouldn't do it. Second, we dictated the name of the file. We shouldn't do it. Then we dictated the name of the fields within the file. We shouldn't do it. Okay? Only things that matter here are the values. Okay? And even then, sometimes we don't need to mention them. Let's see how to correct this. Here is a good example of the same text. It should be possible to configure the security measure via a simple configuration file. Using this configuration, we should be able to configure the toughness of the security we would like to apply, light or heavy, and how many times per day to apply it, from 1 to 5. Okay? This is a good way to write this. Let's take another example. Instead of clicking on the button will trigger the whatever event on the whatever service, we should write something in the spirit of clicking on the button will initiate the sync reply flow, assuming you defined previously what is the sync reply flow. Okay? How to avoid the how pitfall that I see so often. You shouldn't mention services name, file formats, protocol, databases, pipelines. Doesn't matter unless the persona you serve has a specific interest in this detail. For example, it could be that you are working on a feature that exports data to customers, and the customer asks, I want you to support writing to S3 buckets of Amazon. Okay, so you need to define it in the spec. But otherwise, if you are just about exporting data, you can write that you want to be persistent in a cloud storage with your chip. Okay, that's an example. Don't dictate an architecture or specific service provider. Again, unless the persona yourself care about it. For example, let's say that you are working on a feature that sends emails to a bunch of subscribers. Now, if you're doing it something internally to your customer or your users, you don't need to dictate the email service that you are going to use. Let the engineers choose their own service and do whatever they want with this. All you want to do is you can send emails, okay? But if you are doing this as part of white label, or if you're working on a B2B2C business and you're doing it for a customer, and the customer has MailChimp and they want this feature to work with MailChimp, then yes, in that case, you should write in your spec that it needs to integration with MailChimp. But otherwise, it shouldn't be mentioned. Don't mention file configuration or variable names on their values. Instead, focus on what this should serve and what they mean to the product. Again, unless these names or value are presented in the user interface or otherwise meaningful to the customers. Okay? Any question on that? Okay. And mistake number one, drums. Again, I have a picture. Maybe you can guess what the mistake is. Any ideas? What is the number one mistake that I see? And let's see. Loose ends? Not exactly. Mistake number one is what I call not mastering the why. Okay, let's talk about what mastering the why means. Okay, master why is a huge topic. In fact, in my course, I devote a full session to it because it's very, but essentially it's about, is your feature worth building? What does it mean exactly? It means that you are getting familiar with all the data points and signals, feature requests, market trends, insight from internal data sets, and etc. You assess the potential impact on customers or your own company, and then you understand why and if this feature is important. Okay? If you are mastering the why, you should be able to answer why it's important, why now, why this feature and not another, why this approach and not another. Okay? However, if you are not mastering the why, then you probably suffer from one or more of these symptoms. First, you find it hard to decide between this feature and another. You are not sure how impactful this feature is. You are constantly being challenged as for why we do need to work on this. Please remind me again. And when you start a spec review meeting, you are feeling very unconfident, and for the right reasons, because people will ask you a lot of questions of why we are doing this, and you probably don't have good answer for them. Okay, so how to achieve mastering the why? Again, I devote a full session to it in the course. We have a very few minutes now, so I'll do it very briefly. Okay, but essentially it depends on where the feature is coming from. There are three options. It could come from you. It could come from one of the internal stakeholders, management, business teams, another product department in your company, or it could come from the customers or users. Okay? Each of them requires a different way to treat it. If the feature is originating from you, then it's probably a result of some of your product vision or a discovery process that you did. Whatever it is, there are some data points that you need to collect. For example, how the market is doing around that, what are the different trends out there, who are the personas that are going to benefit from it, and how is the competitive landscape looks like. There are other data points also in your own database, user behaviors that you have recorded over the years and stuff like that. You maybe want to look at some dashboard or another. There are some signals that you need to collect to master the why. Now, for big features, this process can take a few days to master the why. For small features, it could be 1 hour, but it's a very important 1 hour where you look at the data, collect the signals, and you are convinced that you understand why you are doing what you are doing. For internal stakeholders, for example, let's say that another team is asking you, I don't know, to create a dashboard for a feature, okay? So you need to understand what data points and signal they are relying on when they're asking you to do something. Let's say you have another team that is asking you to work on an API so they can pull data from your product into their product. You need to understand why they want this. What is the pain that they are trying to solve, and why do you believe it's so important over anything else? Since they ask for it, it's their obligation to provide the answers. And of course, what's the priority of that? When it comes from external stakeholders, you can't ask for data, right? They can't give you any data. So you need to look again for the true pain. We are always looking for the pain behind the complaints or suggested solutions. They may come to you and ask you, I want you to do this and this. They are coming to you with solutions. You may want to record the solution, but you need to dig deep behind it to say, what is the true pain that you are trying to solve? Because you may have a different solution for that, okay? How painful it is, and whether it is a strategic customer, because if this is a strategic customer, you may want to do things that you wouldn't do for other customers. And will the feature serve a wide customer user base? Now, for example, I visited a Facebook group a few days ago for product manager, and one of the product managers asked, okay, I was asked by a very important customer to do an audit for my product. I started to dig into this, and wow, there is a lot of work to do audits for all the operation because there are tons of operations, stuff like that. How to approach it? And some of the wise people who answered this person said, look, you need to check why the customer is asking for that. Because from our experience, when we worked on audit, many times it was for compliance reasons. It means that the customer doesn't really care about what you are doing in your audit. You just want to know that you have audit, so you can say, yes, I'm working with a service provider who is doing an audit. In that case, just hack it. You don't need to work on that hard, okay? So it's very important to master the why. To summarize, if the feature is coming from you, then master the why through some sort of discovery process. Again, for small features, this whole process could be 1 hour, okay? But it's important to do it. If the ask is coming from internal or external stakeholders, it's important to go for the pain, understand what are they suffering from, assess the potential impact if it solves, and if you have data, of course, leverage it. So to summarize, why should you care about the why and why you should master the why? Because when you master the why, you can assess the potential impact. When you master the why, you understand how to measure success. When you master the why, you understand what aspects are important and what's not. For example, let's say you wrote a spec for a feature, it has 5 user stories, and when the engineering is implementing user story number 3, they told you, oh, wow, it's much more complicated than we thought. It's going to be very expensive to implement it the way you wanted, but we have a workaround around that, which is cheaper, but it changes a bit the behavior. Now, if you master the why, you understand what's important and what's not, you may consider it based on that. If this specific aspect is not important, sure, go ahead, do your workaround. However, if this aspect of this feature is important, because you master the why and you know it's important, tell them, guys, even though it's expensive, this is the way it has to be, okay? If you master the why, you can properly prioritize the feature. And of course, if you master the why, you can defend your decision with data. I've seen product managers who are not mastering the why, and I've seen how they don't know to provide good answer when they are challenged, and eventually it ruins the reputation. Okay? Mastering the why is an important key to be successful with product management. With that in mind, questions?